Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. Oh, that was pretty good. It is Wednesday, March 25th, 2026, and today we are talking about creative ways to sell and to price produce. So let's do it. All right. Happy Wednesday, everyone. We're still rolling with our hybrid episodes for the moment. A little old, a little new. I feel like I'll do that until my voice absolutely nails the first segment 100%. And I feel a little more confident that I can carry on for 2 more segments after that in one go. Anyway, the voice continues to improve, but at the snailest pace possible, if that's a word. I did get my onions planted yesterday, finally. It doesn't need my voice, so that's nice. I guess finally is not the word. I always plant them around now, but finally in the sense that I finally got that off my brain, which is nice. So that's good. I will cover them for heavy frost with some row cover just to discourage bolting, but otherwise they should be good to go forth and bulb up. Oh, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to Nicole Camerata, I hope I'm saying that right, of Appleseed Flower Farm, who interviewed me for a Mashable article on the content creation and the equipment I use, among other things. We'll link that in the show notes. Also, because I was on voice restriction for the last, few years, it feels like at this point. Did I mention I was on Dan Brisebois' Seed Farmer podcast recently talking seeds, recorded pre-Voice Apocalypse? That was super fun, and we'll link to that as well. Of course, don't forget, as always, to get your 20-second farm video clips into farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. We love to see those. All right, so just a quick reminder that if you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions now. Though, of course, I will, be backed up for a little while there over the next couple months, but I will, catch up at some point. Anyway, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member TJ Tillman, who writes, quote, "Hey, loving the show in all its different forms. Thought it might be a good discussion topic to talk about alternative places to market your food/seeds/flowers. Getting ready to build a bunch of trellises for vining crops with scrap metal from my work and sell them at the flea market. Got me thinking about where else you could market," end quote. All right, this is a great question, TJ. Very fun. Essentially, where are some alternative places or outlets where you could sell food and or seeds and or flowers that would presumably also make sense financially? I think the flea market you mentioned selling those trellises at is an interesting one. Maybe less so for things like fresh produce and more so for things like maybe wreaths or, dried flowers, seeds, gourds, like birdhouse gourds, those would do well. Broomcorn brooms, loofahs, that sort of, like off the beaten path stuff could work well in a flea market situation. I think I talked about this in the summer last year, but there is a giant yard sale here called the 127 yard sale that goes all up and down Highway 127, hundreds and hundreds of miles. And I always see interesting sort of like homegrown products, hot sauces, pickles, popcorn, pumpkins, etc. there. And obviously tools, teddy bears, DVDs, you name it. Customers are not generally at flea markets or yard sales to buy, like fresh produce, and you're not likely to fetch a great price for any of it, but less perishable sort of value adds could work. Sometimes overlooked in terms of like flower sales is the restaurant displays, but also bouquets at places like, clothing boutiques or maybe lawyers or therapist office, maybe even doctors or dentist office could be an option. But of course, you'd probably want to check with them before bringing any flowers because of, potential allergies or anything like that. However, if you could get those sort of places to agree to a weekly set of bouquets that you just, come and swap out, that could be a great service. Could maybe even talk them into some veggies while you're there. I would start with those with just a, sample bouquet and like a card of how to get a hold of you. In a week when the bouquet, starts to wither, they are likely going to give you a call, or you can call them and ask if they want to swap out, the sample for a new bouquet for a price, of course. They may also, become food customers or, just like whatever else it is that you sell or whatever else somebody else sells. I mean, gosh, this is kind of fun thinking of these things. I feel like I could do alternative market topics all day. Okay, so moving on, maybe for some like food market options, don't overlook other farms. I have toyed with this idea for years of setting up a system with a few fellow farmers where we stock each other's farm stores with our wares. So the meat farmer brings eggs and meat, the flower farmer brings like bouquets, the veggie farmer brings the lettuce, and then you develop an inventory and payout and distribution system where maybe farmers take turns stocking each other's farm fridges and driving to the other farms or whatever. And you go from having one farm store on your own farm to having as many as other farmers will take, and as makes sense for you. A veggie fridge on every meat farm? Rad. That sounds awesome. And sure, farm stores can have, some shrinkage, like maybe somebody will take some stuff. But if you're not paying anyone to be there, losing a few bags of lettuce every month or whatever hardly registers as an expense. Now, obviously, that would be more complicated for meat and egg farmers and possibly flour farmers, which is why I think it probably makes the most sense as a veggie grower to go to them, to bring them the veggies as opposed to them necessarily having to come to you. And then you could just have a sign that said, for veggies, Venmo X farm with a QR code or whatever. And then maybe let the farmer have whatever veggies they need in exchange for using the space, or pay them a nominal fee, for the electricity or both, or whatever makes sense. There are, of course, slightly more complicated alternative options like getting contracts with schools and universities. You would have to be GAP certified and know that system, that whole school system well, and how to navigate it. But a lot of universities and school systems do have local produce programs, or they used to. So it may be worth at least digging around and, with some teachers, friends, or whatever, and seeing what's available. CSAs, like group CSAs, could be an option too. Like teaming up with those other farms to do some sort of group CSA could be a really cool opportunity as well. Sometimes gyms, like gyms, pumping iron gyms, not like people named Jim. Although I don't know, maybe gyms will be into this, but sometimes gyms will pair with you for CSA drop-offs too. So that could be another option. Maybe they would also, be down for keeping a fridge there for fresh produce. Again, I love the idea of embedding stores in stores. So if the fridge idea fits your model and you can identify some stores or businesses that might be open to it, then it doesn't hurt to touch base with those places and just see what they think. Making it easy on them is how to keep it simple. Anyway, what else might be some good alternative, like market options for produce or flowers or seeds or whatever? Do you yourself have one? Something a little bit off the beaten path? Let us know. And otherwise, we're going to take a quick break and then join old me to talk about some other marketing stuff for the rest of the show. BRB.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything: custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. With their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you to put your best food forward. Schedule a demo today at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show.
Okay, so I got an interesting question from our friend Affarmations over there on Instagram recently, who asked, quote, "I have a question that I'd love people's input on. Not sure if this is a good way to ask it, but if you're selling wholesale in particular, how do you handle the uncertainty of yield? For instance, if I grow one bed of carrots and expect 100 pounds yield, obviously completely hypothetical, do I try to contract with a place to sell all 100 pounds? Do I try to contract with them to sell that minus a margin for error? And if so, how do I figure that out? And then how do I handle coming up short, or easier to handle, a gangbusters crop? Just curious how others do it, because I've never worked somewhere that did wholesale and that's all I want to do," end quote. All right, so this is a great question. Now, the advice I generally give to people when it comes to selling and forecasting, especially on large amounts like that, is less about getting it right and wrong and more about keeping a good, honest line of communication open with that customer. What I mean is that, let's say you're contracted to or expected to produce based on an agreement or contract of 100 pounds of carrots, like your example. You will know pretty early on what the stand looks like, and if you can, barring a disaster, likely produce the requested amount. If you see that the germination is poor, that's when you shoot a message to that client and say it right then and there that either one, you will likely come up short on the carrot order, or two, it will be delayed. That way, if they need to supplement, they have the time and they will appreciate you not taking it to the absolute last minute to tell them about it. Or let's say you get it hit with carrot maggots, like right in the middle of production. You can usually tell from like the yellowing of the leaves, or something late in the growing cycle that just ruins the yield. Just let them know immediately when you know something's up. Maybe even reach out to someone else in the area first, whom you know is also producing carrots, and ask them if they may have enough to supplement what you don't have. You don't have to buy those carrots necessarily, though you could, I guess. But the client will appreciate you doing that little bit of extra work for them to locate another source. Now, if you have a bumper crop, try and identify it as early as possible and start looking for other customers. Ask that buyer if they'd be interested in more than the allotted amount. Of course, carrots are easy in this way because they're also a storage crop, which can free up some time to find a new client for them or wait till that original client needs more. It will happen to every grower at some point where you come up short or oversell or think a crop is going to be ready before it actually is. Obviously, experience will help a lot with this, and establishing early on that you may come up short with that client is a really important part of this communication element. Weather changes, droughts or rainstorms throw a wrench into things or decrease yields. This is a wild business and frankly a difficult business. The biggest thing for me is just being open and honest, i.e. good communication from the start. I really like that phrase I learned from Mikey and Kez down there in Australia, that clear is kind. Just be clear and open and honest with your customers and they will appreciate that. Then of course, learn from those mistakes, take notes and try to improve every year. Also, as you suggested, make sure to be upfront with them that things can go awry, but assure them you will let them know the second that you can if something is amiss. That understanding needs to be established up front that, well, nature isn't always playing nice.
Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If you'd rather be on the farm than inside doing your taxes, you are not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show.
Today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Jeremy Horvath, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, big fan of the Daily Show format and having it as part of my family's routine." Thanks, Jeremy. I was wondering if you could talk about how you should set your prices as a relatively new grower. I know there are resources where you can look up historical average produce prices, but since they don't represent local small-scale farms like us, it doesn't seem useful. I want to be able to balance costs to produce with customer willingness to pay, but I'm not sure how to pick a starting point for a crop I've never grown before, especially for wholesale prices, which I don't have visibility to at other similar farms. Also, I'm not related to Ethan Horvath. End quote. All right, great questions, Jeremy. And for the listener, the Ethan Horvath thing there is in reference to when I first shouted Jeremy out for the joining the Patreon page, which, again, thanks, Jeremy. I wondered aloud if he was related to the U.S. men's national team backup goalkeeper, Ethan Horvath, which it turns out he is not. But if anyone is related to Ethan Horvath or any other pro soccer players, feel free to give them a big high five for me. All right, so to Jeremy's question, I'm going to address this as a question about how to price produce in general, just to cover all the bases. Keep in mind, there is no one right way to do this, and I'm sure there will be other approaches that people will add to the comments section. However, the one really important thing for everyone to consider is that the market cannot be the only thing that dictates your prices. Your production costs are exceedingly important in determining your pricing, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to do both retail and wholesale pricing here for listeners. So we'll start with retail and then get to the wholesale stuff. First, what I do when I'm pricing a new item for retail or for the farmer's market is I get a general sense of what a generic organic version of that item is going for at a large grocery store like Whole Foods or whatever. This gives me a baseline to work with. It is not the definitive final price. If you're doing more wholesale, you can also check wholesale pricing online using that same sort of idea. Google wholesale organic beets, and you should be able to find a few options, even if on Amazon or whatever. But I'll get back to wholesale in a minute. Get an average and use that as a baseline. And of course, the USDA does a market report, so I will link that in the show notes as well to add to for your comparisons. Use at least 2 or 3 online sources because some prices may be outdated or just complete outliers. Note that even if you are not certified but you're chemical free, there is nothing wrong with working from the organic price point, at least to develop your baseline price points. You can't legally market your produce as organic, so the customer will tell you if they feel it's worth it or not, but since you are technically growing without chemicals, I think it's fair to price your produce that way. Now, next, you need to know what it costs you to produce X item. We've talked about how to charge your garden bed's rent in an earlier episode of this daily, basically taking your farm budget for the season and dividing that by the number of growing beds you have to figure out how much each bed needs to earn you. Once you are nearing harvest, you should be able to say, for instance, I have 200 bunches of beets on this bed. I need those beet bunches to make $600 in total, so I have to sell the beet bunches at $3 each. According to Whole Foods right now, bunches of 3 or 4 organic beets are currently going for like $2.99, so that works out. You could also decide to charge a bit more, or if you have way more beet bunches to move, you could potentially charge slightly less if you feel like they're not all going to sell. I don't usually recommend doing that, but I also don't recommend wasting food, so Now, what if you only had 100 beets off of that bed, but still needed to make your $600? Well, you could make your beet bunches smaller and still charge $3 each, or you could just charge $5 or $6 for the beet bunch if no one else at market is selling beets, especially. There have been times I've had to charge more than I feel comfortable, but it's also important to occasionally test the market and see what it can handle. I've sold out of stuff that I thought was really small, especially like carrot bunches and that sort of thing, but I've also had people complain to me about the price of our shallots being too high, for instance. And in one particular instance, I explained that shallot seed was expensive and it took 5 or 6 months to grow and that no one else grows shallots at our market, and they were like, oh, that makes sense. And they bought a bunch of them. But it indicated that I should at least consider that I was maybe charging too much. Generally speaking, you should not have to work that hard for sales like that, because for every one of those conversations you get to have, there are probably like 10 or more who are just, people who are just not buying the shallots because the price is so high. Conversely, if you're selling out too quickly every week, you're probably also not charging enough. And if you only occasionally get a price complaint, you are probably charging too little in general. So it's a balance, and it's not always clear. The market will let you know pretty quickly if it's too much or too little, though. Another thing to factor into farmers market pricing, at least, is how much other folks around you are charging. Don't undercut them, because in turn, you're undercutting yourself. If the market for tomatoes is $4 a pound, sure, selling them at $3 may move more tomatoes, but you're ultimately losing money and driving the price down for everyone and making your market neighbors angry. And angry people join farmers market boards, and farmers market boards decide who joins or stays at the market, and sometimes where those people get to set up. So don't make market enemies. If customers have to buy their tomatoes at $4, they will still buy their tomatoes. So what you have to do is increase the quality, improve the display, which I don't think anybody says it like that, but improve the display and cherish the customer relationships. Okay, so now on the more wholesale side of things is pricing for chefs. Restaurants are a different monster because all restaurants are, different monsters. There are high volume restaurants that won't pay as much for wholesale produce, but will buy heaps of it. And then there are restaurants who use a single leaf of lettuce on every plate and won't buy very much produce, but will pay more for higher quality. First, get to know your chef's menu and style so you know what you're working with. Like, is it a high volume restaurant? Is it one of those ones that just puts a single twig on the plate? Second, bring them samples during times when the restaurant is not open or busy. If they have time, ask them what they are paying for X item. They may say, I'm paying $4 a pound for lettuce mix, and you may not be able to meet that, and you probably can't. But bring them a sample and say, this is $9 a pound, or whatever your price is, and it will last you twice as long or more. And see what they say. Let them try it. Let them taste it. Let them have a bag that just sits in the refrigerator for 2 weeks just to prove it. They may not go for it, or they may say, if you can get that down a couple dollars, I'll take 50 pounds a week or whatever. Develop that relationship and trust, and just be consistent. It does not hurt to just ask them how much they are paying for X item, because you will occasionally realize you could be charging more for something, and you may also be like, oh, I can compete with that. Also, share pricing with other farmers who are your friends. They're often in the dark too, and may appreciate getting some idea of what you're charging for a certain item in exchange for sharing what they're charging. If they're weird about it, let them be weird about it in the dark then. It's on them. Maybe that chef doesn't buy the lettuce, but maybe they want the carrots that you have. So you could start there and keep offering and bringing samples, and maybe eventually they pick up the lettuce. Now, obviously, restaurants are not the only type of wholesale. Some are outlets that want bulk produce, like they want to repackage it under their own label, like, I don't know, some supermarkets or something, or their salad stands or whatever. There are also retailers who want you to individually package your produce and sell it that way. For the former, who just want bulk, again, figure out your cost and compare it to what you can find online as a starting point. Same thing, just Google bulk organic carrots or whatever it is, and get an average per pound price of what it's going for. Check the market reports, see if it's in the ballpark of what you need to charge. For the latter, where you are doing the packaging, there should be a premium included in that. I charge 25 cents per bag, for instance, on top of my per pound price to bag stuff individually for a retail outlet. But I'm also always checking the prices of the other sellers to make sure I'm not undercutting or ridiculously overpricing. Oftentimes, this is easy because you can just look at the shelf, see what they are charging for your produce items, do the math to figure out what percentage markup they make, and then figure out what other folks are likely selling their produce for at that particular outlet. Or you can maybe just ask the produce buyer. But if they're being cagey about it, I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. Get creative and just make sure you're not losing money. That's the key, not losing money.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that little hybrid compilation episode. Really appreciate your patience on the voice as always. We are getting closer and closer, I feel like. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and also my wife Hannah for everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear to allow me to get a sip of tea. It's always nice of them. Get yourself moving and you'll be okay. There's a dream weaver. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soul Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. But we're not going to do any shout outs until I can do a full show, which should be soon. Hopefully next week. We'll see. But stay tuned. And thank you all again for your patience. Much love. See you soon. Soon as in tomorrow.